The wood stove had been burning since 4 in the morning, and the whole house smelled like oak ash and black coffee, and the kind of warmth that sits heavy on your chest when the air outside is frozen. I was standing at the kitchen window. December, still dark. The frost on the glass was so thick I had to press my palm against it just to see the yard, and when I pulled my hand away, the heat from my skin had left a print, 5 fingers, already disappearing. That is when I heard it. One set of boots on the gravel path, just one. The slow, careful sound of a man walking alone in the cold. I knew, before I even looked, that it was him. I knew, before I opened the door, that there would be one suitcase, brown leather, worn at the corners. I knew that the air behind him would be empty, that no one would be standing beside him, that there would be no second coat on the hook, no second pair of shoes on the mat, no woman brushing snow off her shoulders in my doorway. He came every December. He came alone every December. And for years I cannot get back, I never once asked why. This channel tells the stories that were never supposed to leave the house. First person, real. The kind of things that were only ever whispered between women over dishes, or never whispered at all. If you have ever watched something happen inside a family and known, in your body, not in your head, that something was wrong, but no one around you had the words or the permission to say it, you are in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and if you want to, tell me in the comments, is there someone in your family who stopped appearing and no one ever explained why? That first winter he came, I had been married 11 months. I did not know him well. He was my husband's father's father, a tall man, thin the way old farmers get thin, like the years had taken everything that wasn't necessary and left only what the body needed to keep standing. He wore the same dark coat every visit, carried the same brown suitcase, and he arrived the same way each time, early, before the children were up, before the light had fully come, as if he wanted to enter the house while it was still half asleep, while no one was watching too closely. My husband would open the door. He would take the suitcase. He would set it in the spare room at the end of the hall, the room that stayed cold because the wood stove's heat never quite reached it. And the visit would begin the way every visit began, with no one mentioning the woman who was not there. I want you to understand how complete the silence was. It was not that we avoided the subject. It was not that someone had once said, "Do not ask," and we remembered. It was deeper than that. It was built into the walls of that house the way the plumbing was built in. You did not see it. You did not think about it. But it carried everything. His wife. My husband's grandmother. She did not come. She had never come. Not in any winter I had been part of this family. And the explanation, when I had first heard it, back during the courtship, said so simply it barely registered, was 3 words. She does not travel. My husband's mother had said it. My husband had repeated it. The bishop's wife once, at a quilting, had nodded and added, "She is not well." And that was the end. Not the end of a conversation. The end of the possibility of a conversation. Those words were not an answer. They were a door, closed, locked, painted the same color as the wall so you would forget there had ever been a door at all. He would sit at our kitchen table every evening, the same chair, second from the window, just outside the full reach of the overhead light, so his face was always half in shadow. My husband sat at the head. I sat where I always sat, closest to the stove, closest to the work, the children between us. And the grandfather would hold his coffee with both hands, not the way you hold something hot, but the way you hold something you are afraid of losing. Both palms pressed around the mug, fingers overlapping. His knuckles were large and white. I remember thinking he held that cup the way some men hold a hymnal during prayer, tight, deliberate, like the act of holding was the act of believing. The clock on the wall behind him ticked loud enough to count, and inside that ticking, inside the dry heat of the wood stove, and the small sounds of my children eating. No one said her name. No one asked about her health. No one asked if she had sent a message, a gift, a word. The not asking was perfect. It was so practiced it did not feel like avoidance. It felt like air. You breathed it without knowing. I followed his rhythms because I had been taught to follow. He woke early. He walked the property alone, slow, his hands in his coat pockets, looking at things without commenting, the fence, the barn, the fields, the tree line. He ate what I set before him and thanked me quietly. He attended services with us on Sunday, sitting in the men's section with my husband, his head bowed lower than anyone else's, as if he were trying to fold himself smaller. He spoke about weather, about the price of hay, about a horse he had once owned, a draft mare named Ruth, and the way he said her name, Ruth, was the only time his voice changed, the only time something moved underneath it. He spoke about the past the way you speak about a country you have left, with precision about the landscape, but silence about why you crossed the border. And at night, after the dishes, after the children's prayers, after my husband had locked the doors the way he locked them every night, the same order, same checking, same ritual of securing, the grandfather would go to the spare room, and the door would close, and the cold in that room would hold him until morning. I did not ask. I need you to hear that. Not once. Not in the first winter, or the third, or the fifth. I did not pull my husband aside and say, "Who is she? What happened to her? Why does she never come?" I did not write her a letter. I did not ask the other women, the ones at quilting, at canning, at the after-service meals where we stood in kitchens identical to mine, with our hands in the same warm water. I did not ask because asking was not something I did, about anything. Asking was reaching, and reaching was pride, and pride was the first sin of a wife who had forgotten her position. I knew this, not because someone had sat me down and explained it, because the knowledge was in everything, in the angle of my husband's silence when I spoke too long, in the way the older women's mouths tightened when a younger wife laughed too freely, in the way my own mother had once told me, before the wedding, standing in the kitchen, her hands white with flour. A good wife makes herself small enough to fit inside his life, without rearranging the furniture. I was good. I was small. And so the grandfather came, and the grandmother did not, and the silence held. It was the fourth winter, maybe the fifth. December again, the house sealed against the cold, the children older now, sleeping deeper. I could not sleep. My husband was beside me, breathing the way he breathed in sleep, even, steady, the breathing of a man who had never once lain awake, wondering if he was living the right life. I got up. I told myself I was checking the stove. I told myself I was getting water, but my feet took me down the hall to the spare room, and the door was open. Moonlight came through the small window, and it lay across the room like something spilled, pale, cold, specific. The brown suitcase was on the bed, open, half unpacked. His good shirt folded on top, his suspenders, his Bible, the leather cover so worn it was the color of dust. And underneath the Bible, the edge of it showing, the corner bent, was a photograph. I should not have touched it. I knew that even then. It was not mine. It was inside his things, inside his suitcase, inside a room that smelled like lavender and old wool. A smell that did not belong to him, that belonged to someone who was not there. Someone whose scent had soaked into the lining of that suitcase, the way years of proximity soak into fabric. But I touched it, I pulled it out, and I stood in the moonlight and looked at a woman I had never seen. She was young, maybe 20, maybe 22. She was standing in a field, tall grass behind her, light all over her face, and she was laughing. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and it moved like it had just been caught by wind. She was not wearing a prayer covering. She was not standing beside anyone. She was not modest or arranged or composed or small. She was laughing with her whole mouth open and her eyes half closed, and her body tilted slightly forward, like the laughter had weight, like it was pulling her towards something good. This was my husband's grandmother. This was the woman who does not travel. This was the woman whose name I had never heard spoken with anything warmer than a period at the end of a sentence. I stood there a long time. The grandfather was asleep in the chair by the window, not in the bed, never in the bed, as if the bed in someone else's house was a comfort he did not believe he had earned. His hands were curled in his lap even in sleep, the same way they curled around the coffee cup, as if holding was the only posture his body remembered. I looked at his hands, and I looked at her face in the photograph, and something inside me shifted. Not broke, not cracked, something quieter than that. Something settled. The way sediment settles in water when you stop stirring. I did not understand what I was feeling. I would not understand it for years. But the distance between the woman laughing in that field and the words "she does not travel" was a distance I could feel in my chest. Physical, heavy. The weight of something that had been pressed flat for so long it had forgotten it was three-dimensional. I put the photograph back. I closed the suitcase. I went back to my room and lay beside my husband in the dark. I did not ask about her. I lay still and practiced the quiet and breathed the same air I had always breathed. But the woman in the photograph was behind my eyelids now, and her mouth was open, and she was laughing at something I could not hear. The sound of my own footsteps is what I remember. Not his, not the grandfather's boots on frozen gravel, not my husband's steady stride through the house. Mine. The sound of one woman walking across a barn floor at 5 a.m, alone. The cold so deep, it turned my breath into something I could see. The barn was the only place I went without being sent. The animals needed tending before dawn, and that task was mine, the way all the invisible tasks were mine. The ones that happened in the dark, before the family woke, before the house required me to be a particular version of myself. I would push the barn door open, and the smell would hit me first. Hay and manure and frozen wood, and the warm, heavy breath of the cattle shifting in their stalls. I would stand there for a moment. Just stand. Not praying, not thinking. Just being a body in a space where no one was watching me be a body. And my footsteps on that concrete floor, one set, always one set, were the loneliest sound I knew. Though I did not call it lonely then. I called it mourning. I called it chores. I called it the way things are. My husband was not a cruel man. I need to say that, and I need you to believe it. Because the truth is more complicated than cruelty, and that is what makes it so hard to leave. He was built by the same system that built me. He was handed authority the way I was handed obedience. Early, completely, without anyone asking either of us if we wanted what we were being given. He led our household the way his father had led his, the way the bishop led the congregation, with quiet certainty, with decisions made and then announced, with a calm that I mistook for peace for years, before I understood it was control wearing patience like a coat. He decided when we ate, when we slept, when the children were disciplined and how, who visited and who did not, what I wore, not by choosing my clothes, but by looking at me in a way that told me I had chosen wrong. He was gentle with the children. He could fix anything, a broken axle, a split board, a hinge that had rusted shut. His hands were capable and specific. I think he loved me. I think he loved me the way the system taught him love looked. A wife who was present, quiet, fed, housed, corrected when necessary, and grateful. He did not know there was another kind. Neither did I. Not yet. I want to tell you about the mornings after the grandfather left. Every January, after his 2 weeks were finished, after my husband drove him back in the buggy, after the spare room door was closed, and the lavender and wool smell began to fade, there was a silence in the house that was different from the usual silence. Heavier. Like the house itself was holding something it could not digest. I would strip the bed in the spare room. I would fold the quilt, a double ring pattern, old, hand-stitched, something someone's mother or grandmother had made decades before I arrived in this family. I would press my face into that quilt before I washed it, every year. I pressed my face into the fabric and breathed in the lavender, and I did not know why. I did not know I was looking for her. I did not know I was pressing my face against the closest thing to a woman who had been erased so completely that her scent in a suitcase lining was the loudest protest she had left. I just knew the quilt smelled like something I did not have a word for, and that after I washed it, the room felt emptier than empty. It felt abandoned. And then one year, the 6th winter or the 7th, he did not come. December arrived and the gravel stayed quiet and the spare room stayed cold and no one said why. My husband said only, "He is not well this year." The same 3-word structure, the same door, painted shut. It was not the grandfather who told me. It was not my husband. It was not a letter or a phone call or a confession spoken across our kitchen table with the clock ticking its endless ticking behind us. It was a woman named Edna. I will call her Edna because I cannot give you her real name, but I can give you her kitchen, the fluorescent light humming above the sink, the yellow checked curtain she never replaced, the specific sound of her hands in dishwater, the way the suds caught the light, and her wrists moved in slow circles, like washing dishes was a kind of meditation she had perfected over 40 years of standing in the same spot, at the same counter, in the same house she had entered as a bride, and had never been given reason to believe she could leave. I was drying. She was washing. It was after a funeral preparation. One of the older men in the community had passed, and the women were doing what women always did, which was feed the living while the men buried the dead. We were alone. The other women had gone to set tables in the fellowship hall, and Edna, without looking at me, without changing the rhythm of her hands in the water, said it. She said, "Your husband's grandmother was not sick. She was kept." She said it the way you would say, "The bread is on the second shelf," or "The towels need folding." Flat, factual, tucked inside the ordinary rhythm of work. She did not pause. She did not look at me to see if I understood. She said the next part while reaching for a serving plate, her fingers finding the edge of it under the suds with the practiced certainty of a woman who knew where every dish lived without looking. "She tried to come once," Edna said. "That winter he stopped visiting. That was the winter after they brought her back. The elders decided she was unwell. Her husband agreed. And the word unwell, once the elders use it, becomes the walls of the room you will live in for the rest of your life." She lifted the plate from the water. She set it in the rack. She picked up the dish towel from her shoulder and dried her hands. Slowly, finger by finger. The way you dry your hands when you have just done something that cannot be undone. And then she went back to washing. The water ran. The fluorescent light hummed. And I stood there holding a dry towel and a wet glass and a sentence that had just rearranged every winter I had ever lived through. I did not go home immediately. I stood outside Edna's kitchen door in the January cold, and I felt my hands shaking. Not from the temperature, though the temperature was brutal, but from the inside, from somewhere behind my ribs, a tremor that moved outward through my arms and into my fingers, the way a sound moves outward through water. She was kept. The word kept. I had kept chickens. I had kept preserves in the cellar. I had kept quiet. The word meant to hold something in a place it cannot leave. The word meant to maintain something in a condition someone else has chosen. The word meant the woman in the photograph, the one laughing in the field with her hair loose and her mouth wide open, had been folded into a house and a diagnosis and a silence so complete that her own family had forgotten she was a person and remembered her only as an absence. She does not travel. She is not well. These were not descriptions. They were locks, and I had walked past them every December without even seeing the door. I need to tell you about the phone, because the phone is where the two of us met, the grandmother and me. Though we never spoke, and though by the time I understood what the phone meant, It was too late for speaking to matter. There was a phone on the wall in our hallway, between the kitchen and the spare room. Black, heavy, the kind with a cord that coiled like a held breath. My husband used it. I did not. Not because there was a rule, not because someone had said wives do not make phone calls, but because the not using had been taught so quietly and so early that it felt like my own preference. I did not want to call anyone. That is what I believed. The way I believed, I did not want to cut my hair or read after 9 or sit in the front of the buggy. The wanting had been removed so carefully that the place where it had been felt smooth, natural, like skin that had healed over something buried. One evening during a visit, the grandfather sitting in his chair, my husband beside him, the children in bed, the phone rang. My husband answered it. He spoke low, brief, the words clipped impractical. He hung up. He did not say who it was. The grandfather's hands tightened around his coffee cup, both palms, fingers overlapping, knuckles white, and he looked at the phone the way you look at a window in a room where someone you love is being held. He looked at it for a long time, and then he looked away. And I understood, standing in the doorway with a dish towel over my shoulder, Edna's exact gesture, that the person on the other end of that phone call was sitting in a house somewhere, alone, in a silence that was identical to mine, that she had been trained by the same system, held by the same word, unwell, and that the phone line between us was not a connection. It was a measurement. It was the exact distance between two women the system had taught not to reach for each other. And I put my hand on that phone after they had gone to bed. I picked up the receiver. I held it against my ear and listened to the dial tone, that long, flat, empty hum, and I set it back down. Not because someone told me to, because my hand knew. My hand had been taught. And the thing I cannot forgive, the thing that still makes my chest tight when I say it, is that I believed, in that moment, that putting the phone down was my choice. That the hand setting down the receiver was mine. It was not. It was the system's hand. It had been the system's hand for years. And it had been hers too, the grandmother's, the woman laughing in the field, her hand putting down a phone in another house, another decade, the same silence, the same smooth place where the wanting used to be. There is a room in that house I will not take you inside. I will tell you what the hallway looked like after. I will tell you the light was gray and the floor was cold under my feet, and the spare room door was open the way it was always open after he stopped coming. I will tell you the bed was stripped. The quilt was folded at the foot, the double ring pattern, the hand stitching, the fabric that had held lavender and wool, and the ghost of a woman I never met. I will tell you I stood in that doorway the way I had stood in every doorway of my life, waiting for permission to enter, waiting for someone to tell me what the room required of me, waiting the way I had been taught waiting was a woman's first posture. But no one was there. The grandfather was gone. He had stopped coming 2 winters before. Whether he had passed or whether the distance had finally become too heavy for his body to carry every December, I did not know. My husband did not explain. The 3-word door had closed again. He is not well. And I had nodded the way I always nodded. But now I was standing in the doorway, and the room was empty, and the smell was still there. Lavender. Old wool. Faint now, almost imagined, but present the way a bruise is present after the color fades. You cannot see it, but you can feel it when you press. I pressed. I breathed it in, and something in me that had been standing still for years, standing in barns, standing in kitchens, standing beside phones with my hand already pulling away, that something took one step forward, not out of the house, not out of the marriage, not yet, but forward, into the room, into the cold that the wood stove never reached, and I sat on that stripped bed and I put my hands in my lap the way his hands had been in his lap when he slept in the chair, curled, holding, and I said it out loud to no one. I said, "She was kept. and I am being kept. And the sound of my own voice in that empty room was the loudest thing I had heard in years. I will not tell you I left the next morning. That is not how it works. I will tell you I found a book. It was not the kind of book anyone in my community would have owned. It was in the public library in the town 12 miles from our property, the town I was permitted to visit once a month for supplies, the town where I sometimes sat in the parking lot of the grocery store for 10 extra minutes, just to be inside a space that did not belong to anyone I knew. The library was small. The woman behind the desk did not look up. I found it on a shelf near the back, a book about patterns, not quilting patterns, not the kind of patterns I had been taught to recognize. Patterns of control, patterns of silence, patterns that repeat across generations the way the double ring pattern repeated across the surface of that quilt. The same shape, the same structure, the same design handed from one woman's hands to the next, none of them asking if they wanted to keep stitching it. The book used a phrase I had never heard before: coercive control. I read it standing in the aisle with my coat still on and my hands still cold from the drive, and the fluorescent light buzzing the same way Edna's kitchen light had buzzed the day she told me the truth. Coercive control. 2 words. And every scene I have described to you, the boots on frozen gravel, the coffee cup held with both hands, the clock ticking in the kitchen, the photograph of a woman laughing, the phone set back down, the quilt pressed against my face, the barn at 5 in the morning, Edna's hands in the dishwater, every one of those moments rearranged. They had been ordinary. They became evidence. They had been my life. They became a pattern. And the pattern had a name, and the name was not headship. It was not modesty. It was not tradition or faith or the way things are. It was control. It had always been control. They called her unwell. The word for it is isolated. They called her husband faithful. The word for it is enforcer. They called me obedient. The word for it is trapped. They called it family. The word for it is system. And the woman in the photograph, the one standing in the field with her mouth open and her hair in the wind, she was not a memory. She was a before. She was the proof that this woman had existed whole and alive and full of sound before the system found her and pressed her flat and called the flatness peace. If you know the sound of one set of footsteps where there should be 2. If there is a woman in your family whose chair stayed empty and whose absence was explained in 3 words that were not an explanation but a lock. If you have put a phone down and believed it was your choice. If there is a photograph somewhere of a woman laughing, and the distance between that photograph and the woman you knew is a distance no one in your family will explain. If you have pressed your face into fabric looking for someone you were never allowed to meet, then you already know. You have always known. The word exists. It is yours to use. And if no one in your life has said it to you yet, I am saying it now. You were not imagining it. It was real. It was a system, and your silence was never your choice. Tell me, is there a woman in your family who disappeared without anyone using that word? Write her name here. Or write the word you never had permission to say. This place holds what the family would not. The grandmother in the photograph never got to tell you her name, so I am telling you mine, and I am telling you I left. I walked through the doorway, my hands were open, and the cold, for the first time, was behind me.